Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. The goal of the webinar today is to provide the Photonics Society community an overview of the IEEE Standards Association, commonly referred to as the SA. Specifically, we'll cover the following topics. We'll look at what are standards, why standards, an overview of the structure of the Standards Association. We'll talk about how to develop standards, how to get involved, and a slight preview to some projects. We'll conclude with a Q&A session. First, let's look at what are standards. Standards are published documents that establish specifications and procedures designed to maximize the reliability of the materials, products, methodologies, and/or services people use every day. It's important to know that standards are purely voluntary. So what is the role of the Standards Association? On behalf of the IEEE, SA serves as the facilitator for the standards development process, offering the platforms, rules, governance, methodologies, and facilitation services that objectively address the standards development lifecycle. So why develop standards? Standards and the IEEE standards creating process make technology more open to new ideas, promote interoperability and safety, and give all stakeholders, from industry to academia and research to government agencies and NGOs, the ability to focus where they see the most opportunity. A world built on standards is one where markets get bigger faster and lives are improved more rapidly, and where a level playing field for technology development benefits everyone. Let's take a closer look at the IEEE-SA. The Standards Association is a leading consensus-building organization that develops and advances global technologies in various areas, as shown here on the slide. IEEE brings together a broad range of individuals and organizations to promote innovation, enable the creation and expansion of international markets, and drives the functionality, capabilities, and interoperability of a wide range of products and services. IEEE-SA would like to formally welcome the Photonics Society to the Standards Association as a technical sponsor. The next section, we will look more closely at the governance of SA, what the role of a sponsor is, and how standards are actually written. Many of you are probably familiar with the IEEE structure, but let's look closely how the Standards Association fits in and reports into the IEEE. On the top, you will see the IEEE Board of Directors, which comprises the executive leadership for the entire IEEE organization. The Standards Association is directed by a Board of Governors, who report into the IEEE Board of Directors. The IEEE-SA Board of Governors establishes policy and guidelines for the direction and development of the IEEE Standards Program. They also have the financial oversight for the entire IEEE Standards Association. The Standards Board was established and members are appointed by the IEEE-SA Board of Governors. The IEEE-SA Standards Board encourages and coordinates the development of new and revision standards. Next, we'll take a closer look at the Standards Board and their role in the standards development, and also the committees that report into the Standards Board. The Standards Board has appointed a number of committees to oversee and facilitate the standards development process. These include the New Standards Committee, commonly referred to as NESCOM. NESCOM recommends the approval of project authorization requests, known as PARs, to the Standards Association Standards Board, the SASB. REVCOM, the Review Committee, recommends the approval of standards to the Standards Board. AUDCOM, the Audit Committee, oversees the standards development activities, reviews sponsor and working group policies and procedures. PROCOM, the Procedures Committee, recommends changes in procedures to the Standards Board. PATCOM, the Patent Committee, provides oversight of the use of any patents and patent information in the IEEE standards. And lastly, Standards Coordinating Committees, SCCs, act as a sponsor when the scope of a standard activity is too broad for a single society or a society is unable to carry out the work. I'd like to also mention that these committees are populated and the members are volunteers. Now, let's break down the standards development groups and take a look at what it means to be a standards sponsor within IEEE-SA. As mentioned earlier, the Photonics Society recently became an IEEE-SA standards sponsor, which now enables the committee to develop standards. This graphic shows how the sponsor reports into the standards board and how subgroups of the sponsor report into the sponsor themselves. The sponsor is the organization that assumes the responsibility for a particular standards idea within the IEEE. There has to be some part of the IEEE that takes the responsibility for the technical content of the document, and this oversight is provided by the sponsor. The sponsor operates in accordance with a written set of policies and procedures that have been accepted by the IEEE-SA Standards Board. A sponsor may be comprised of study groups, which formulate projects, working groups who develop standards, and other subgroups such as an administrative committee. We'll take a closer look at these groups next. The sponsor responsibilities are defined in the IEEE-SA bylaws, but on the screen there are a few key ones that I'd like to point out. Sponsors have the responsibility to submit properly completed project authorization requests to initiate new standards projects. They organize the technical work of a standard. They manage and host standards development meetings. They have the responsibility to ensure that all standards meetings are open to all interested parties. They must submit annual financial report for the operation of the sponsor and for its standards development groups underneath it. The sponsor monitors standards developing committees for any signs of dominance by any one interest category, individual, or organization. And the sponsor must ensure that each working group follows a written set of policies and procedures that is approved by the sponsor. Study groups. Study groups study a project idea to determine whether there is sufficient interest and resources that exist to develop an IEEE draft standard. If so, a PAR is developed. The project authorization request is developed. Officially, a standards project does not exist until a PAR is approved. A study group is valid for up to 6 months, and then a PAR needs to be submitted. IEEE-SA has guidelines on how the study group can operate business. So many times, the study group is the first step in initiating a project. It is a group of individuals coming together to formulate that actual scope of work. Working groups are tasked with drafting the standard, and I want to highlight that the IEEE-SA has 2 types of standards development working groups, an individual-based working group and an entity-based working group. An individual-based working group is one where it operates as a one individual, one vote basis and are open for anybody to participate. Participants do not have to be IEEE, IEEE-SA, or society members to be part of an individual-based working group. However, the working group chair and vice chair must be members of the SA and either IEEE members or a society member. Other working group officers should be members of the IEEE and the SA. The second type of working group is called an entity-based working group. This is a one entity, one vote. So instead of voting as an individual, you are voting one corporation, one vote. Participation membership for an entity-based working group is open to IEEE-SA corporate members only. All working group officers shall be representatives of the IEEE-SA Advanced Corporate members, and only IEEE-SA Advanced Corporate members can contribute and vote in entity working groups. Other corporate members may observe the entity working groups. So these are 2 models which, when you submit a PAR, the project authorization request, you would decide which method you would develop the standard under. Again, the working groups operate in accordance with a set of policies and procedures that has been approved by the sponsor. This slide has some additional resources that will be available to you if you'd like to further your knowledge about the IEEE-SA standards and some of the policies that we touched base on this morning. The next section reviews the entire standards development process end to end. I'm going to focus on a high-level overview of the process, as this is the most applicable to you at this time. This presentation will be available to you to refer to in the future for more details. IEEE standards are classified as standards, recommended practices, guides, and also trial use documents. Standards are documents that have mandatory requirements. Recommended practices are documents in which procedures and positions are preferred by the IEEE are presented. And a guide is a document in which alternate approaches to good practice are suggested, but no clear-cut recommendations are made. Each of these three are commonly referred to as standards, but the type of verb that is used throughout the standard often helps decide which type of standard it should be. Again, a standard with mandatory, you'll see the term shall throughout the document. A recommended practice would have should statements, and where a guide would have a may. You may follow this. Lastly, the trial use documents are publications that are in effect for not more than 3 years. They can be any type of the above categories just mentioned, and a draft is usually considered when a trial use status if the working group feels the draft input needs a broader constituency, if the sponsor is unable to resolve negative ballots to a satisfactory level, or if the SASB, the Standards Board, cannot attain a suitable level of approval for a draft submitted for adoption as an IEEE standard. Those would be some cases that you would consider having a trial use document. Next, the IEEE standards projects are classified as a new. This is a document that does not replace or modify any standard. A revision, a document that updates or replaces an existing IEEE standard. An amendment, which is a document that adds or removes or alters material for an existing IEEE standard. You can make editorial or technical corrections. A core addendum is only to make editorial corrections. There is no new material introduced. And an errata is a document that contains only grammatical corrections that were introduced during the publication process of the standard. IEEE standards development follow a well-defined path from concept to completion and are guided by 5 basic principles. Some of these we have already touched upon. Due process. This is having highly visible procedures for standards creation and having all of the working groups follow them. Again, these are the policies that AudCom, the audit committee, is reviewing for the working groups and the sponsors. Openness, allowing all interested parties to participate in the standards development process. Consensus is a clearly defined percentage of those in the balloting group vote to approve a draft standard. We'll talk more about consensus shortly. Balance, this means the balloting groups include groups of different individual interested parties, whether it is a customer, a user, a manufacturer, academia. They have to be balanced. No one of those groups can be more than 1/3. And the right to appeal. Anyone may appeal a standards development decision at any point before or after the standard has been approved. This chart illustrates the whole standards process in a simplified form. First, the idea of a standard is usually developed. Again, this is where a study group would come into play to review an idea. And then a PAR, project authorization request, is submitted. Once approved, the working group would then go into draft development to write the standard. Once the working group has agreed in consensus, we will go into the sponsor balloting and public review section. After you reach consensus in the sponsor ballot, you will move on to the IEEE-SA for final approval, and then you'll go into publication. The PAR is a 4-year life cycle, and the standard is valid for 10 years. And we'll touch upon each of these areas in the next section. In order to help facilitate this process, we have some tools that are available to our working groups. Just to give you a brief overview, if you are looking for a document management, a calendar, a project management tool, we offer an iMeet Central workspace. This helps with draft sharing among the working group as it'll track version control. An email listserv. If you would like to have one set up for your working group, we highly encourage this. Teleconference and web conference services. IEEE-SA offers a Join Me account for all working groups to use. If you'd like to have a public-facing website, we can set up a WordPress site for you, and you would likely appoint one person of the working group to maintain and manage, kind of be your webmaster for the group. And lastly, our My Project system, which is a IEEE-SA in-house tool, and it's a web-based tool that facilitates the standards development process. So your balloting, your PAR submission is all done in this tool. Now let's take a high-level look at some tips to follow for a standards development meeting, which could be held face-to-face, teleconference, may be held in conjunction with the Photonics conference, or on its own. IEEE has meeting guidelines to help assist the working group follow proper meeting policies, and this slide will just highlight a few of those. Meetings shall be conducted in compliance with all applicable laws, including antitrust and competition. A call for patents shall be done at all working group meetings that has a PAR approved. There are items that you should not discuss at a working group meeting, and we encourage attendees to speak up if they are. You should not discuss the interpretation, validity, or essentiality of patents or essential patent claims, license rates and terms or conditions, setting product prices, allocation of customers or division sales markets. Any litigation shall also not be discussed. Meetings shall run in accordance with the Roberts Rules of Order. We often have our chairs consulting the rules for guidance. And lastly, there are some resource materials here that help the meeting guidelines for a working group meeting. Next, we'll talk about the standards development meeting itself and some tips for draft development. When a working group is meeting face-to-face or teleconference, we often recommend to not spend your time in the nitty-gritty draft development. To develop an outline, to form task groups or writing groups to go offline and then write their sections and bring it back. We encourage to follow the IEEE style manual for document structure, to use the IEEE-SA standards template. This will ensure that you meet the IEEE style manual guidelines and conform to the needed style. A technical editor is often assigned. The editor will ensure consistency and can gather and incorporate all those contributions from the different writing groups and make it into one succinct document. And lastly, once you have your draft written in your working group must obtain approval from the draft in order to go to that next step, the actual formal sponsor balloting. So your working group will approve the draft standard first, and then we will go on to our sponsor balloting process. In the sponsor balloting process, we are opening it up to a broader constituency, not just the working group, to now view and ballot comment on the document itself. So again, the balloters will classify their relationship relative to the scope of the draft standard, the producer, user, government, and so on. The ballot group must be balanced. None of those interest categories can be more than 1/3 of the group. Ballot group shall have a minimum of 10 for an individual ballot and 5 for an entity ballot. And once you form your ballot group, once you have that pool of people that are interested in voting on the document, you must start the actual ballot within 6 months. We do have a procedure for all of this that goes through our My Project system. First, you would initiate the ballot invitation. This is where you open up the invitation to invite other societies, possibly the Photonics, the computer, whoever you think may be interested in the document. Once you have the invitation complete and balanced, we actually go to the actual 30-day ballot where your balloters are voting to approve, do not approve, or abstain. After the ballot closes, the working group will begin comment resolution, which is the process in which the working group reviews and responds to all comments received. The group will either accept, reject, or revise a comment. After comment resolution, you will go into a recirculation ballot if needed. The recirculation ballot is giving all of those balloters an opportunity to review the responses to the comments, and they can then decide to either change their vote or to make additional comments. There are 2 thresholds that is needed to reach for consensus. We have a 75% response rate and a 75% approval rate. After you reach that 75% approval rate, The balloters can only comment on any changes to the document, so you are narrowing down the scope of material that the balloters can comment on. The balloting completes when the IEEE consensus is met, once you have received that 75% vote, fewer than 30% of the ballot group has abstained, and the number of approved votes is 75% or more of the total approved and do not approve with comments. The My Project system will go ahead and automatically calculate this for you as the working group. In addition to the actual sponsor balloting system, which you do need to be an IEEE-SA member, the IEEE-SA has a public review process, which provides an opportunity for any interested party anywhere in the world to submit comments on any eligible initial ballot draft. You do not need to be an IEEE-SA member, but you also do not get a vote with the public review process. This is just to open it up for additional comments. The public review is automatically initiated at the same time of your sponsor ballot, and it will last for 60 days. Any material interested person can sign up for this. Again, you do not need to have an IEEE-SA membership. The draft standard is ready to submit to the IEEE-SA Standards Board when you have met the consensus voting requirements, all the comments are responded to, and any comments accompanying the do not approve votes have been circulated to the ballot group. The working group chair, sponsor chair, or designee will then submit the draft in the My Project system. The working group must not change the draft after the last ballot. Editorial changes are made by the editorial staff here at IEEE-SA. You're submitting your draft to the review committee, RevCom, where members review the draft and ballot the results, and then they submit them in My Project. The working group chair or sponsor chair responds to the RevCom comments in a timely manner, and then RevCom will make a recommendation to approve the draft to the Standards Board, and it is the Standards Board who ultimately approves the draft. After the IEEE-SA has approved the standard, the SA editors can work the document to ensure that the standard is grammatically and systematically correct using the American English. The editors cannot make any technical changes. Again, they can only make editorial changes such as the formatting, make wordsmithing, however, no technical changes. The editor will work with the working group chair. They will discuss any questions or potentially problematic changes. After this is done, the working group members receive a complimentary copy of the standard. After the SASB approves the standard, the working group chair is then asked to select candidates for working group award. Standards have a revision of, standards must have a revision approved by the SASB, the Standards Board, prior to the close of the year 10 in order to remain active. Once you receive your initial approval, you have a 10-year lifespan. So you must complete a revision within that 10 years in order to remain an active standard. When you open your standard for revision, you can either make changes to the standard, changes only to the references or bibliography, or no changes at all. If you don't make any changes, it'll retain its regular designation, but the title page will reflect that their maintenance action has been taken. If you do not have a revision project completed within the 10 years, your standard will be transferred into inactive status. In between the revision, the sponsor can develop amendments and core agenda, but these do not change that 10-year life cycle maintenance date. If standards are no longer useful or contain significant obsolete or poor data, the sponsor can go ahead and withdraw that prior to the 10-year life cycle at any point. Next, we'll talk about how you can get involved in the Photonics Standards Committee. Here's the scope of work that the Photonics Standards Committee will be covering. The scope of the sponsor is to cover standards in, but not limited to, the following areas of interest: lasers, optical devices, optical fibers, and associated light wave technology and their applications in systems and subsystems in which the quantum electronic devices are key elements. The Photonics Standards Committee will be led by John Kulik, who will be the sponsor chair. John has been appointed by the Society and will be chairing this effort. So how can you get involved in this newly formed Standards Committee? If you're interested, post-webinar, you will receive an email with a link that has a form. If you could complete that form, we'll retain your contact information and we'll be reaching out to you shortly in order to form that actual Standards Committee. As a member of the Standards Committee, you will be reviewing proposals that are received for the Photonics Standards Committee to decide if the group should sponsor the projects. If it's within your scope, you can have some dialogue and engage in the industry in order to decide if you should embark on taking that project PAR, that project authorization request on. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to John Kulik, the sponsor chair himself, to give a few words about standards and his interest in photonics.
Oh, hello, Erin. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that description of the process and for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is John Kulik, as Erin mentioned. I'm employed by Siemens Corporation in Princeton, New Jersey, as a member of the Corporate Technology Organization. Part of my responsibilities there is to help coordinate the standards strategy for Siemens in the U.S. As far as my background goes, I am also a senior member of IEEE and been a member of IEEE for over 35 years and a member of the Photonics Society for just as long. I've also been a member of the IEEE Standards Association for 12 years. And during that time, I have served in a number of volunteer governance roles. I am currently the past chair of the IEEE Standards Association Standards Board, and I'm a member of the Board of Governors. When Erin first informed me that the Photonics Society was considering becoming a sponsor and engaging in some standards development activity, I was very excited, being a longtime member of the Photonics Society, and I told her that I would be glad to volunteer my services to help this effort. So with that in mind, I'm glad to offer my services as the initial sponsored chair to the Photonics Society Standards Committee as it begins to embark on its first standards project. Personally, early in my career, I was involved in a lot of activity centered around active fiber optic components, especially items like semiconductor lasers, LEDs, photodetectors, and much of this work was focused on applications in data communications. And as a result of that activity, I became involved in many early standards activities, items like early data protocols such as FDDI, and physical items like fiber optic connectors. And I remember it was a very exciting time, and the need for industry standards was very apparent in that burgeoning industry. And so it was through experiences like that that I became convinced of the value of standards, the value that standards can provide to a growing industry. So I hope that this will be a rewarding experience here in the Photonics Society for those of you who become involved, and I look forward to working with all society members and others who would like to participate in this process. So that's a little bit of my background, and I'm happy to turn the floor back over to Erin. Erin?
Thank you, John. Appreciate that, and we are certainly most excited to be working with John here at the Standards Association. Next, I'd like to give a high-level overview of two proposals that have come into the IEEE-SA, and I will ask Dr. Gao, in order to give you a technical brief overview of the two proposals, to speak at this time to give you a high-level overview of Guide for Assessment of Safety of Laser Transmission in High-Powered Laser Systems, and also a Guide for the Assessment of Fiber Laser. So these are two proposals that IEEE-SA has received, and I will turn the floor over to Dr. Gao in order to brief you with an overview of the intent and why the need exists for these projects. Dr. Gao?
Oh.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Gao. Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I will give a short presentation for our two proposals. The first one is the industrial fiber laser. There has three parts. Need for the project. The second is scope. The third one is purpose. First one, need for the project. Each fiber laser manufacturer has his own technical parameters and product types. It makes the laser equipment integrators and the end users inconvenient, and also the fiber laser compatibilities for different manufacturers is poor. This guide works on uniform technical parameters and test methods of fiber laser. The scope of this guide some parameters that should be included in an industrial fiber laser product. Contains laser parameters, structural requirements, usage conditions, environment suitabilities, reliability, safety and protection test method. This guide is used by fiber laser producer, laser processing equipment integrator, and the end user. The purpose of this guide aims to help producers to produce reliable industrial fiber lasers that conforms with the parameter requirements suggested by this guide. With uniform specification, it helps mitigate unnecessary confusion and technical obstacle after product is delivered. This is our first proposal about the industrial fiber laser. And the second proposal, safety specifications of laser transmission in high power laser systems. They also contain three parts: needs for the project, and second scope, and the third one is purpose. First one is the needs for the project. With the frequent application of industrial high-power laser system. Safety reduce the risk of access loss and human casualty. The industrial high-power laser systems is a $100 million market globally. There is no standard that helps guide producers, operators, and related end users to use them safely. This guide can help fill in the gap. And the scope of this guide recommends safety measurements to protect against the effect caused by exclusively by thermal, optical, mechanical, and relative effect in passive optical components and optical cables using in high power industrial laser systems. It contains this 8 parts: information on automatic power reduction, information for manufacturers, operating organizations and users, fibers and connectors damage induced by high powers, contamination, degradation, or burn through of protection cape and shutter, potentially collimated beam profile resulting in the increased optical attenuators, collimators, splitters, and other passive components. The purpose of this guide is to establish a safety code for people who designs, operate, or maintains a high-power laser systems so as to protect both people and machines from possible damages. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gao. And again, to the attendees on this webinar, if you're interested in joining the Photonics Standards Committee, these are some of the proposals that you would be tasked with reviewing, determining if the scope, purpose, and need are within the committee, and then authorizing the PAR to be sponsored by the committee. As Dr. Gao mentioned, there was a need, a scope, and a purpose. These are items that we have on the IEEE-SA PAR, the Project Authorization Request Form, that needs to be completed and then submitted to our new standards, our NESCOM committee, and approved by the board in order for that project to be sanctioned as an IEEE-SA working group. So if you are interested in joining, again, for all the attendees, you will receive an email with the link, and please reach out if you have any questions or concerns. We'd be more than happy to address them and look forward to working with everyone. We'll now go into a question and answer session. If there's any questions, please send them in the chat, as mentioned earlier by David.
Yeah, thanks, Erin, and thank you, Dr. Gao, and of course, thank you, John, as well. We did get a couple questions that came through, so I'll just read them in the order they were received. The first one, Erin, is how long does it take to develop a standard?
Okay, thanks, David. Good question. So the time of the development really depends on how frequently the working group is meeting and oftentimes on the technology. If there is an immediate need or if it's cutting edge technology, we see the standards coming in a little bit sooner. Once you have a PAR approved, you have 4 years to complete the work. You can go back to NESCOM, the New Standards Committee, and ask for an extension, but I would say on average around 3 years we are seeing this completion from start to finish. But again, it can vary. You can certainly get it done in 18 months or sometimes a little over 4 years if it takes a little bit longer.
Okay, Erin, question number 2. Can working groups work with other standards developing organizations?
Yes, we certainly know that the volunteer resource time is limited, so we encourage collaborating where it makes sense. So we have many agreements with other SDOs in place already that allows us to jointly develop projects. If it's more of a liaison relationship, we can certainly look into creating a liaison relationship or creating a new agreement in order to jointly work with another SDO, another standards development organization, in order to develop one standard with 2 parties. So yes, we certainly have that capability. If we don't have an agreement, we would just need to work, on creating one if it makes sense.
Awesome, thanks, Erin. We have another question here. Erin spoke about balance of sponsor committees. What kind of balance do they look to establish?
So the balance comes into play at the sponsor balloting level. This is once your draft is complete and you're going out to get the formal 75% approval. So we don't want any one classification to be dominated. So we don't want one standard to be voted on only by manufacturers or only by producers. So the balance rule is that only any classification, you have to have a minimum of 5, and no one classification can have more than 1/3 of the entire balloting group. So we don't want any group to dominate the ballot. We want the broad constituency to have a balanced representation.
Excellent. Okay, and I think we have, let's see, I have one more question here. Are there any requirements to become a member of the Photonics Standards Committee?
Great question. Yes, in the policies and procedures for the Standards Committee of the Photonics Society, it does stipulate that you have to be a Photonics member, so that you would need to have a Photonics Society membership. And we can certainly, if you fill out the form that you're interested, if you're not already a member, we can certainly walk you through on how to join.